"Leave and never return," my father said, his voice as crisp as the linen napkins, exiling me between the salad and the main course. I took my 8-year-old daughter's hand and walked out. Thinking the silence was the worst of it, I was wrong. 5 minutes later, state police cruisers flooded the street behind us, and I realized my parents hadn't just kicked me out of the family, they had set me up to take the fall. The tires of my 10-year-old sedan crunched over the pristine, packed snow of Briar Hollow, a sound that always reminded me of knuckles cracking. It was the sound of tension. I gripped the steering wheel at 10 and 2, my knuckles turning white, matching the landscape. Beside me, my 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, was humming a song she had learned in the school winter pageant, blissfully unaware that we were driving into the emotional equivalent of a minefield. She kicked her boots against the floor mat in rhythm, staring out at the passing wrought iron gates and the massive oaks that lined the main avenue of my hometown. "Look at the lights." "Mom," she said, pointing a mitten at a sprawling colonial set back from the road, draped in thousands of tasteful, champagne-colored LEDs. "It looks like a castle." "It does," I said, forcing my voice into a register of calm I did not feel. "Granddad and Grandma always have the best tree. Though, remember? I remembered. I remembered the tree that was always 12 feet tall, decorated by a professional designer because my mother, Eleanor, claimed she lacked the spatial eye for symmetry. I remembered how we were not allowed to touch the ornaments. I remembered that Christmas in Briar Hollow was not about joy. It was about performance. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked tired. I was 32, a single mother working 50-hour weeks as a compliance analyst, and no amount of concealer could hide the fact that I was running on caffeine and hope, but I had promised myself this year would be different. I had rehearsed the boundaries in my head for the entire 2-hour drive from the city. Rule 1, keep things calm. Rule 2, keep Sophie happy. Rule 3, leave early if the old dynamics start. Just a quick dinner, I whispered to myself. In and out. 3 hours. Tops. The house loomed ahead, a Georgian brick behemoth that sat on a hill overlooking the town. The windows were glowing with that warm, inviting amber light that rich people seemed to have a monopoly on. It looked like a postcard. It looked like safety, but I knew better. To the community. Richard and Eleanor Kelly were pillars of generosity, the founders of the Hearthlight Giving Fund, the people who cut ribbons at new libraries. To me, they were a beautiful, polished wall that I had been banging my head against for my entire life. I parked the car at the bottom of the circular driveway, careful not to block the spot reserved for my brother, Julian, the golden boy, Julian, who could set the house on fire and be praised for the warmth. "Ready?" I asked Sophie. She nodded, clutching her small bag of gifts. "I hope Grandma likes the scarf I made. She will love it," I lied. We walked up the path, the cold air biting at my cheeks. I rang the bell, the deep, resonant chime that vibrated through the heavy oak door, and waited. I put on my armor, I pasted a smile on my face that did not reach my eyes, and I squeezed Sophie's hand. The door opened. My mother stood there, draped in a cashmere cardigan that probably cost more than my rent. Her silver hair was coiffed into a perfect, immovable helmet. She looked at me, then at Sophie, then briefly over my shoulder at my car, her gaze lingering on a patch of rust near the wheel well. "Claire," she said, "you made it. Merry Christmas." "Mom," I said, leaning in for a hug that felt like embracing a mannequin. "You're late," she said, pulling back and smoothing her sweater. "We expected you at 4. It is 4:15, Mom. The roads were icy." "Well, come in. You are letting the heat out. Look at you. Sophie, you have grown a foot." Sophie beamed. "I am in the 3rd grade now. Grandma." "Wonderful," Eleanor said, already turning her back to walk down the hallway. "Wipe your feet, please. The runner is new." The house smelled of cinnamon, pine, and furniture polish. It was immaculate. Not a magazine out of place, not a speck of dust on the baseboards. It felt less like a home and more like a museum exhibit titled Upper Middle Class Success. In the living room, the fire was roaring, and my father was standing by the mantel, swirling a glass of scotch. Richard Kelly was a large man who took up space even when he was sitting down. He had the kind of handshake that crushed bones and a voice that was used to giving orders. "There she is," he said, not moving toward me. "The prodigal daughter." "Hi, Dad," I said. He looked me up and down, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You look thin." "Claire, are you eating? Or is that stress? I told you that job in the city would grind you down." "I am fine. Dad, I am actually up for a promotion in the new year." "Sure you are," he said, taking a sip of his drink. "Just like you were going to finish that master's degree." I felt the familiar prickle of heat in my chest. The old shame trigger that he knew exactly how to pull. I took a breath. Rule 1. Keep things calm. I redirected. "Sophie, show Granddad your boots. They light up when she walks." Sophie stomped a foot, and the heel flashed pink. My father blinked at it, unimpressed, very loud. He said, I steered Sophie toward the Christmas tree, which was indeed perfect and entirely untouchable. I spent the next hour deflecting. When my mother asked why I had not dated anyone in 2 years, I asked about her garden club. When my father mentioned that my car was an embarrassment to the neighborhood, I asked about his golf game. I was a tennis player returning every serve, refusing to let the ball hit the net. Then the front door slammed open. Julian swept in like a hurricane, bringing a gust of cold air and charisma with him. He was 2 years younger than me, but carried himself with the confidence of a man who had never been told no. He was wearing a camel coat and a scarf that looked effortlessly tossed on. Sorry I'm late," he boomed, his voice filling the cavernous ceilings. The traffic on the bridge was a nightmare. "Julian," my mother cried, her face lighting up in a way it never did for me. "We were just worried about you. Don't worry about me." "Ellie," he said, kissing her on the cheek and calling her by the nickname only he was allowed to use. "I am here now. Let the party start." He turned to me, his smile dropping a fraction of an inch before pinned back in place. "Hey, Claire. Good to see you." "Hi. Julian." He ruffled Sophie's hair, ignoring her attempt to fix it. "Hey, kiddo. Uncle Julian brought presents. Big ones." He tossed his keys on the entry table, the same table I had been scolded for placing my purse on 5 minutes earlier, and my father poured him a drink without asking. "Rough day?" Dad asked. "You have no idea," Julian said, loosening his tie. "The end-of-year books are a disaster. I have been putting out fires since 6 this morning. That is the burden of leadership." "Son," Dad said, glowing with pride. Julian took a long drink, his eyes darting around the room. He looked manic. Underneath the tan and the expensive suit, there was a tightness in his jaw, a frantic energy that felt different from his usual arrogance. He caught me looking at him and winked, but it felt forced. "We need to talk later." "Dad," Julian said, his voice lowering. "Some paperwork needs to be handled before the new year. Just some admin stuff for the trust. Not now." "Julian," Mom said, clapping her hands. "It is Christmas Eve dinner. No business until dessert." Julian laughed, but the sound was brittle. Right, no business, just family. We moved to the dining room. The table was set with the good china, the gold-rimmed plates that we were terrified of breaking as children. There were place cards written in my mother's calligraphy. I sat next to Sophie, instinctively positioning myself between her and the rest of them. The meal was a blur of roasted lamb and heavy silence. My mother criticized the catering staff she had hired. My father lectured Julian on interest rates. I cut Sophie's meat into tiny pieces and whispered jokes to her, keeping her in a bubble of our own making. "Claire," my mother said sharply, interrupting my quiet conversation with my daughter, "you are mumbling. It is rude. I'm just making sure Sophie eats." "Mom, she is 8, not 2. She can eat without a cheerleader." I put my fork down. The food tasted like ash. I checked my watch. 6:30, if we skip dessert. We could be on the road by 7. Suddenly, Julian cleared his throat. He reached under his chair and pulled out a leather portfolio. "I know Mom said no business," he said, his voice too loud in the quiet room. "But this is actually kind of urgent, and since everyone is here, it makes sense to just get it done." "Julian." "Really?" Mom sighed. But she didn't stop him. "It is for the girls," Julian said, looking at me. "Well, for the family." He slid a manila folder across the polished mahogany table. It stopped right in front of my plate. "What is this?" I asked, not touching it. "Just some updates for the Kelly Hearthstone Trust," Julian said, waving a hand dismissively. "And the Hearthlight Giving Fund. We are restructuring the board for tax purposes before the fiscal year rolls over." I stared at the folder. The Hearthstone Trust was the family vehicle, the entity that held the assets I was supposedly going to inherit one day, but currently had zero access to. The Hearthlight Giving Fund was their charity arm, the source of their social status. Dad and I already signed. Julian said, "We just need your signature to make it unanimous. It simplifies things." "Simplifies what?" I asked. "The liability structure," Dad said, his voice hard. "Just sign it, Claire. Don't make it a production." I opened the folder. The first page was a dense block of legal text. I scanned it, my compliance training kicking in automatically. I looked for keywords: indemnification, power of attorney, trustee designation. My eyes snagged on a paragraph near the bottom of the second page. "The undersigned agrees to assume full assumption of debt and liability for all outstanding liens attached to Briarcrest Properties, LLC." I turned the page. Transfer of primary trustee authority to Claire Elizabeth Kelly. Effective immediately. Inclusive of all retroactive financial obligations. My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't a tax restructure. This was a transfer of ownership, and not the good kind. They weren't giving me assets. They were giving me anchors. I looked up. Julian was watching me, sweat beading on his forehead. My father was staring at his wine glass. My mother was aggressively buttering a roll. "I cannot sign this," I said quietly. "Excuse me?" Dad said. Looking up, I tapped the paper. "This says I am accepting liability for debts attached to a company I have never heard of." Briarcrest Properties? What is that? And why would I become the primary trustee now? "You have always said Julian manages the trust. It is a formality," Julian said quickly. "Just a placeholder title. We swap it back in January. It is just to clear the books for the audit." "What audit?" I asked. "The yearly audit," Julian snapped. "Jesus, Claire, why do you always have to complicate everything?" "I am not complicating it," I said. Keeping my voice level, "I am reading it. This gives me power of attorney over the Hearthlight Giving Fund, but it also assigns me responsibility for any misappropriation of funds prior to this date." I looked at my brother. "Misappropriation? It is boilerplate language," he shouted. "If it is boilerplate, then it won't matter if I have my attorney look at it." I said, "I close the folder. I will take it with me. I will have Sloan review it next week, and if everything is standard, I will sign it then." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that precedes an explosion. My father placed his hands flat on the table. "You will sign it now," he said. "No, Dad, I won't, Claire," my mother said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. "Do not do this. Do not ruin Christmas. I am not ruining anything," I said, my hand shaking slightly as I reached for my water glass. "I am protecting myself. I do not understand why you need this signed tonight, on Christmas Eve, without legal counsel, because we are family," Dad roared. He stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. Sophie flinched, dropping her fork. "Because we are family. You do what needs to be done," Dad shouted, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "We have supported you your entire life. We paid for your school. We helped you when you got pregnant with that child." "Don't," I warned him. "Do not bring Sophie into this." He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You are ungrateful. You are selfish. Julian is trying to save this family, and you are too busy playing lawyer to help." "Save the family from what?" I asked. "From what, Dad?" "From embarrassment," he yelled. "But you wouldn't understand that, would you? You have been an embarrassment since the day you left." I looked at Sophie. She was frozen, her eyes wide, staring at her plate. She was making herself small. I knew that feeling. I had spent 30 years making myself small in this house. I stood up. "Okay," I said. "Okay, what?" Julian asked, looking panicked. "You will sign?" "No," I said. "I am leaving." I walked around the table to Sophie. "Come on, honey. Put your coat on. You are not walking out of here," Dad said. "Watch me. If you walk out that door," he hissed, leaning over the table, his voice dropping to a terrifying, cold whisper. "If you walk out that door without signing that paper, you are done. Do you hear me? No trust, no inheritance, no contact. You leave, and you never return." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had raised me, the man who was supposed to be my safety. I looked at my mother, who was refusing to make eye contact, choosing her husband's rage over her daughter's protection. I looked at Julian, who looked like a cornered animal. They weren't asking for help. They were looking for a scapegoat. I didn't know what they had done, but I knew they wanted me to hold the bag for it. I grabbed Sophie's hand. "We are heading out," I said, my voice steady, though my knees felt like water. "It is late. Claire!" Julian yelled as I turned my back. "Claire, don't be a bitch!" I didn't stop. I walked my daughter out of the dining room, through the perfect foyer, and out the heavy oak door. I didn't look back at the warmth. I stepped into the cold, biting wind of the driveway. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely get the keys out of my pocket. I unlocked the car and opened the back door for Sophie. "Mom?" she whispered. "Is Grandpa mad at me?" "No." "Baby," I said, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "No. Grown-up stuff just got boring. Grandpa is just grumpy because he is hungry. Why were they yelling? Because they are silly." I said, "Hey, you know what? This party was boring anyway. Let's go get hot cocoa at that diner on the highway, the one with the whipped cream tower." "Really?" she asked, her voice small. "Really. Now buckle up. We are blowing this popsicle stand." I shut her door and ran to the driver's side. I threw the car into reverse before I had even fully settled in the seat. I needed to get away. I needed distance. My skin was crawling. I drove down the long, winding driveway, my headlights cutting through the darkness. I didn't breathe until we hit the main road. I turned left, away from the house, away from the lies. I drove for exactly 5 minutes. We were nearing the edge of the neighborhood, the place where the estates gave way to the slightly smaller, slightly less manicured homes of the merely wealthy. I looked in my rearview mirror. Blue lights. A lot of them. At first, I thought they were pulling me over. My heart hammered against my ribs. Had my father called the police? Had he reported the car stolen? But the cars flew past me. 2 unmarked sedans with grille lights flashing, followed by a state patrol car. They were speeding in the opposite direction, toward the hill, toward my parents' house. I instinctively tapped the brakes. I pulled over to the curb, confused. I watched them disappear around the bend in the rearview mirror. "Mom?" Sophie asked. "What are those police cars doing?" "I don't know." "Honey," I said. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I picked it up. It was a text message from a number I didn't recognize. No name, just an area code from the state capitol. I opened it. "Do not go back inside. It's starting." I stared at the screen. The glow of the phone illuminated the dashboard dust. It's starting. I looked back at the road where the police cars had vanished. They weren't going for a noise complaint. You don't send unmarked cars for a domestic dispute. They were going with a purpose. I thought about the folder. Misappropriation of funds, Briarcrest properties, liability. I thought about Julian's sweat, my father's desperation, the way they tried to force me to sign a document that transferred trustee authority effective immediately. If I had signed that paper, I would be the trustee right now. I would be the one the police were looking for. A chill that had nothing to do with the winter air settled into my marrow. They knew. They knew the police were coming. That's why Julian was late. That's why the paperwork was urgent. They weren't trying to close the books for the year. They were trying to pin a crime on me before the warrant was served. I looked out the window. A neighbor, Mrs. Gable, was standing on her porch, walking her dog. She looked at my car, then looked up the street toward my parents' house, then looked back at me. She stared. It wasn't a friendly wave. It was the look you give someone who is about to be on the news. My stomach turned over. "Mom?" Sophie asked again, her voice rising in pitch. "Can we go?" "It is cold." "Yeah," I whispered. "Yeah, baby, we are going." I put the car in drive. My hands were gripping the wheel so hard my fingers ached. I wanted to vomit. I wanted to scream, but I did neither. I drove away. I drove past the beautiful Christmas lights, past the wreath-adorned lampposts, past the sign that said, "Welcome to Briar Hollow, a community of tradition." I drove away, but the dread sat heavy in the passenger seat beside me, because even though I hadn't signed the paper, I knew my family. I knew how they operated. If they couldn't get my signature, they wouldn't just give up. I thought about the credit card rejection I had received last month. I thought about the weird piece of mail from a bank I didn't use that I had thrown away. Assuming it was junk, I pressed the accelerator, putting miles between us and the flashing lights. But I knew it didn't matter how fast I drove. Someone had been using my name, and the nightmare wasn't ending. It was just beginning. The morning sun did not bring clarity. It brought a headache that throbbed behind my eyes and a phone that refused to stop vibrating. I had driven 2 hours back to the city, carried a sleeping Sophie up 3 flights of stairs to our apartment, and collapsed onto the sofa in my coat. I had slept for maybe an hour. Now, the gray light of Christmas morning was filtering through the blinds, illuminating the modest pile of gifts I had arranged under our small, artificial tree. Sophie was still asleep. That was the only mercy. I walked into the kitchen and started the coffee pot. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I felt a strange, cold detachment, like I was watching a movie of my own life. I picked up my phone. It was a minefield. 17 missed calls, 12 from my mother, 5 from Julian, none from my father. And then there were the texts, not from family, but from people in Briar Hollow I hadn't spoken to in years. High school friends, old neighbors, the kind of people who fed on drama like it was oxygen. Saw the police cars at your parents' place. Is everyone okay? Heard you were in town. Crazy night. Huh? And then, a screenshot sent by an old acquaintance, a woman named Becky who ran the town's unofficial gossip Facebook page. The screenshot was of a post my mother had made at 3 a.m. "Please pray for our family. We are heartbroken that a personal dispute and a misunderstanding has led to unnecessary drama on this holy night. We love our daughter Claire very much, despite her instability, and we hope she finds the help she needs. We will cooperate fully to clear up these false accusations." I stared at the screen. The coffee pot hissed, spitting steam into the air. Instability. They were spinning it. Less than 12 hours after they tried to force me to sign fraudulent documents. Less than 12 hours after the state police raided their home, they were already building the narrative. I was the unstable one. I was the one who caused the scene. The implication was clear. I had called the police. I had ruined Christmas. I deleted the thread without replying. I did not have time for high school dynamics. I had a daughter to protect and a legal blast radius to measure. "Mommy?" I turned. Sophie was standing in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. She was wearing her flannel pajamas with the penguins on them. She looked small and perfect, and entirely too innocent for the world she had been born into. "Merry Christmas, baby," I said, forcing warmth into my voice. I knelt down and opened my arms. She ran into them, burying her face in my neck. "Did Santa come?" "He sure did. He ate all the cookies, too." Her eyes went wide. "Even the carrot for the reindeer?" "Even the carrot." We spent the next 2 hours in a bubble. We tore open wrapping paper. We built a Lego castle. I made pancakes, shaped like snowmen. I played Christmas music loud enough to drown out the buzzing of my phone, which I had buried under a pile of throw pillows, but reality has a way of seeping in. At 10 o'clock, my phone rang with a ringtone I had assigned to only one person, Sloane Mercer. Sloane was not just an attorney. She was a shark in a silk blouse, a woman I had met during a compliance seminar 3 years ago. We had bonded over cheap wine and a shared hatred for sloppy paperwork. When I needed a will drafted, I went to her. When I needed a reality check, I went to her. I picked up the phone. "Merry Christmas, Sloane. I am sorry to answer on a holiday. I am not calling to wish you a Merry Christmas." "Claire," Sloane said. Her voice was clipped, devoid of its usual dry humor. "Are you at a secure computer?" "I am in my kitchen. Go to your laptop. Log into the secure portal I just sent you a link for. We need to talk. Now." I felt the blood drain from my face. Sophie was happily distracted by a new drawing set in the living room. I stepped into my bedroom and closed the door. I opened my laptop. I clicked the link. A document loaded. It was a credit report. My credit report. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "Scroll to the second page." Sloane said, "Look at the open lines of credit." I scrolled. I saw my student loans. I saw my car payment. I saw my one credit card with a $2,000 limit. And then I saw the rest. First National Bank of Briar Hollow. Home equity line of credit. Outstanding balance, $85,000. Briar Crest Properties, LLC. Cosigner, Claire E. Kelly, commercial loan. Outstanding balance, $150,000. Hearthlight Giving Fund. Executive credit card. Authorized user, Claire E. Kelly. Outstanding balance, $42,000. The numbers blurred. I sat down on the edge of my bed. "Sloane," I whispered, "I didn't sign these. I know you didn't." Sloane said, "I pulled the signature cards this morning. I called in a favor with a friend at the bank branch in Briar Hollow. Claire, the signatures are good forgeries, but they are dated on days you were in the city. One of them is dated from last March, the week you were in the hospital with pneumonia." My stomach turned over. Last March. My mother had come to visit. She had been so helpful. She had watered my plants. She had gone through my mail. "They stole my identity." I said, "My parents stole my identity." "It looks like they have been using your name to leverage debt for at least 18 months. Sloane said, "That LLC? Briar Crest Properties? It is a shell company. It owns a plot of undeveloped swampland on the edge of town. It looks like they took out a commercial construction loan to develop it. But no ground was ever broken. The money is gone. Where did it go? My guess?" Sloane said, "To maintain the lifestyle, to pay for the parties, to keep the Hearthlight Giving Fund looking solvent. It is a Ponzi scheme, Claire, and they used your credit score as the fuel. I thought about the folder at dinner. The urgency. They tried to make me sign something last night. I said, they said it was a trustee transfer." Sloane hummed, a low, dangerous sound. "Of course they did. They knew the investigation was closing in. If you had signed that, you would have ratified all of this debt. You would have legally accepted responsibility for the LLC and the charity's accounts." "They weren't asking for help, Claire. They were looking for a patsy." I closed my eyes. I saw my father's face. Leave and never return. He was willing to banish me. I said, "But he wanted to make sure I took the debt with me first." "Claire, listen to me," Sloane said. "This is going to get ugly. The state attorney general is involved. I am seeing flags here for wire fraud, bank fraud, and forgery. You are going to be contacted. They already raided the house." I said, "Last night, 5 minutes after I left." "Good," Sloane said. "That helps us. It proves you weren't there when the warrant was served. But you need to get ahead of this. You are not a suspect right now. But your name is on the paperwork. We need to file an affidavit of forgery immediately. We need to freeze your credit, and you need to cut off all contact. Do not speak to them. Do not text them. If they show up at your door, you call the police." "My brother," I said, "Julian, he knew. He is the treasurer of the charity." "Claire." Sloane said, "He didn't just know. He probably notarized the documents." I hung up the phone. I sat in the silence of my bedroom, surrounded by the ghosts of my childhood. I had spent my entire adult life thinking I was the disappointment, I thought I was the one who had failed them by not marrying rich, by not staying in Briar Hollow, by being a single mother. I had carried that guilt like a stone in my pocket. But it was a lie, all of it. While I was scraping together rent money, they were taking vacations on credit cards in my name. While I was apologizing for not being able to afford a bigger Christmas gift for them, they were leveraging a phantom construction project against my future. I walked back into the living room. Sophie was holding up a picture she had drawn. It was a stick figure of me and a stick figure of her, holding hands under a giant sun. "Look, Mommy," she said. "It is us. It is beautiful." I said. I sat down on the floor and pulled her into my lap. I held her tight, breathing in the scent of her shampoo. I needed to anchor myself. I needed to remember why I was fighting. My phone rang again. It was Julian. I stared at the screen. Sloan had said no contact, but I needed to hear it. I needed to hear his voice. I needed to know if there was anything left of the brother I used to build forts with. I answered, "Claire?" Julian's voice was high, tight, bordering on hysterical. "Claire, thank God. Why aren't you answering Mom?" "I am busy." "Julian, it is Christmas." "Busy? Are you insane? Do you know what is happening here? They took the computers. Claire, they took the files. They took Dad's laptop." I walked into the kitchen, lowering my voice so Sophie wouldn't hear. "Why did they take them?" "Julian? Because of some misunderstanding with the zoning permits," he shouted. "It is politics. The mayor is trying to squeeze Dad out of the country club board. That is all it is." "But they are making it look like something else. Like fraud?" I asked. "Don't use that word," he hissed. "Listen, Claire, you need to fix this." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "I need to fix it?" "Yes, you. The investigators are asking about the Hearthlight accounts. They are asking about Briar Crest. You are listed on the papers. You need to call them. You need to tell them that you authorized the transfers." I gripped the granite countertop. "Excuse me?" "Just tell them it was a misunderstanding," Julian pleaded, his voice cracking. "Tell them you gave us verbal permission to sign for you because you were busy in the city. Tell them you were handling the development project remotely. If you say that, it becomes a civil matter. They walk away. We pay a fine. It goes away. And what happens to me?" "Julian," I asked, "if I say I authorized $150,000 in debt for a fake company, it is not fake. We were going to build. We just ran into delays. What happens to me?" I repeated. "Nothing. Mom and Dad will cover the payments. We will pay it all off next year when the trust matures. We just need time. Claire, please. Mom is hyperventilating. Dad looks like he's going to have a heart attack. Do you want to kill him?" There it was. The weaponization of health. The ultimate guilt trip. "You put my name on a credit card." "Julian," I said, "you put my name on a mortgage." "We did it for the family," he screamed. "We did it to keep the house, to keep the charity running. We helped people. Claire, we gave out scholarships. We fixed up the library. With stolen money." I said, "With my credit." "You are so selfish." He spat. "You have always been selfish. You left us here to deal with everything while you went off to play city girl. You owe us this. I owe you nothing." I said, "Claire, listen to me," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "If you don't help us, if you let them sink us, you are going down too. Your name is on the documents. If we go to prison, you are coming with us. Do you want your daughter to visit you in a cell?" The threat hung in the air, sharp and cold. He wasn't protecting the family. He was protecting himself. He was terrified. I could hear the panic in his breathing. He knew exactly what he had done. I looked through the doorway at Sophie. She was singing to herself. "Goodbye, Julian." I said, "Claire, do not hang up. If you—" I ended the call. I blocked the number. I stood there for a long time, my heart hammering against my ribs. I felt sick, physically sick. The betrayal was so total, so absolute, that it was hard to comprehend. It wasn't just money. It was the fact that they had looked at me, their daughter, their sister, and seen nothing but a resource to be exploited, a disposable asset. I spent the rest of the day in a fugue state of aggressive normalcy. I made a roast chicken. We watched a cartoon movie about a reindeer. I built a pillow fort. I laughed when Sophie made a joke. I was a fortress of calm. But inside, I was preparing for war. The next morning, the 26th of December, the doorbell rang. I checked the peephole. It wasn't my parents. It was a man and a woman in gray suits. They looked like they didn't own a single piece of clothing that wasn't polyester. I opened the door, leaving the security chain on. "Claire Kelly?" the woman asked. She held up a badge. "Investigator Vance, State Attorney General's office. This is Detective Miller." I nodded. "I expected you. Can we come in?" I unchained the door. Sophie was in her room playing. I led them to the kitchen table. "We are investigating the Hearthlight Giving Fund and its associated entities," Investigator Vance said, sitting down and opening a notebook. "We executed a search warrant at the home of Richard and Eleanor Kelly on Christmas Eve." "I know." I said, "I was there just before you arrived." "We know." Detective Miller said, "We saw you leave." Vance looked at me. "Ms. Kelly, your name appears as a primary signatory on several accounts connected to the fund, as well as the managing member of Briarcrest Properties, LLC. We are trying to determine your level of involvement." "I have no involvement." I said, "I have never heard of Briarcrest Properties until yesterday." Miller pulled a photocopy from a folder. "Is this your signature?" He slid a document across the table. It was a loan application. The signature at the bottom read, "Claire E. Kelly." It looped and curled in a way that looked remarkably like mine. But the K was wrong. My K was sharp. This one was rounded. "No," I said, "that is not my signature." Vance watched me closely. "Ms. Kelly, we have reason to believe that funds from the charity were funneled into this LLC and then used to pay for personal expenses of the Kelly family. Cars, vacations, home renovations. If you signed these documents, you could be looking at conspiracy charges." "I didn't sign them," I said, my voice steady. "I have already retained counsel. My attorney, Sloan Mercer, is filing an affidavit of forgery this afternoon. I am a victim here. Investigator Vance, not a co-conspirator." Vance's expression softened slightly. "If that is true, Ms. Kelly, then you are the key witness, because without your testimony stating that you did not authorize these transactions, your parents can claim you were the mastermind. They have already made statements to that effect." I froze. "They said I was the mastermind?" Miller nodded. "They claimed in their initial interview that you managed the finances for the charity. They said you presented them with papers to sign and they trusted you." I felt a laugh bubble up in my throat, bitter and sharp. "They said I managed the finances? I live 2 hours away. I work in compliance. I have never attended a board meeting." "That is what we need you to prove," Vance said. "If you help us, if you provide us with your travel records, your handwriting samples, your communication logs, we can untangle this. But you need to be prepared. This is going to be a public fight. Your parents are well regarded in Briar Hollow. They were celebrated." I said, "I remembered the gala last year, the article in the local paper calling my father the heart of the Hollow. I remembered how they would guilt me into lending them money. $200 here, $500 there. We are just a little short until the dividends clear. Claire, don't be stingy. Family helps family." I had eaten ramen noodles for a month so I could send them money for a medical bill that I now realized was probably a payment on a boat slip. I felt a wave of nausea. "I will help you," I said. "I will give you everything." Vance nodded. "Good. We will be in touch." When they left, I sat at the table and stared at the empty chair. The silence of the apartment felt heavy. I needed to find the paperwork. I went to the closet in the hallway. I kept a plastic bin of old documents on the top shelf. Tax returns, birth certificates, old lease agreements. I pulled it down. I started digging. I needed to find proof of my whereabouts for the dates on the loans. I needed to find old emails. At the bottom of the bin, I found a burner phone. It was an old flip phone I had used years ago, back when I was briefly between jobs and couldn't afford a contract. I hadn't turned it on in 6 years. I found a charger in a tangle of wires. I plugged it in. It beeped. The screen lit up. I scrolled through the menu. There was one saved voicemail. It was dated 5 years ago. From my grandmother's lawyer, Mr. Henderson, my grandmother. Rose had passed away a month before the voicemail was left. I pressed play. Claire, this is Arthur Henderson. I am calling because I have some concerns about the trust administration. Your father is pushing to have the assets moved to a different custodial account, one that has fewer oversight restrictions. I know Rose wanted you to have a voice in this. Even if the trust doesn't fully vest until you are 35, give me a call. I want to make sure you understand what they are trying to do. I replayed the message. The trust doesn't fully vest until you are 35. I was 32. My parents had always told me the trust was small. A token amount that had been used up by my education. They said there was nothing left. But if it vested at 35, why were they rushing now? Why the sudden need to transfer trustee authority effective immediately? Because they had drained it. They had drained the charity. They had drained the LLC. And now, they were trying to gain control of the grandmother's trust before I turned 35 and realized it was empty. Or worse, they were trying to use the trust to cover the holes in the other accounts. Arthur Henderson had died 2 years ago. I couldn't call him, but I had the voicemail, and I had Sloan. I closed the bin. Night had fallen. The city lights were twinkling outside the window. Cold and distant. I checked on Sophie. She was sound asleep, her arm draped over a stuffed bear. I walked into the living room and turned off the lights. I sat on the sofa in the dark, and finally, I let go. I pulled my knees to my chest and buried my face in my hands. The tears came hot and fast, scalding my skin. I didn't cry loud enough to wake Sophie. I cried in silence, my body shaking with the force of it. I wasn't crying because I missed them. I wasn't crying because I wanted to go home. I was crying because I finally understood the truth. My parents didn't love me. They didn't even like me. To them, I was just a credit score. I was a signature. I was a shield they could hold up to protect themselves from the consequences of their own greed. They were willing to send me to prison to save their reputation at the country club. They were willing to let my daughter grow up without a mother so they wouldn't have to admit they were frauds. I cried until my chest ached. I cried for the little girl who used to try so hard to be perfect so they would notice her. I cried for the woman who had spent years thinking she was broken. Then, I stopped. I wiped my face with my sleeve. I took a deep breath. The air in the apartment was still and quiet. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. They wanted a fight. They wanted a scapegoat. They thought I was weak. They thought I was the same quiet, desperate to please daughter who had sat at their dinner table and swallowed their insults. They were wrong. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was Sophie's mother, and I was going to burn their house down. The conference room at Sloan Mercer's firm was a sterile glass box that smelled of expensive coffee and aggressive litigation. The table was covered in paper, a sea of white sheets that represented the slow, methodical dismantling of my life. We were 3 days post-Christmas, and the holiday spirit had been replaced by forensic accounting. Sloan stood at the whiteboard, a red marker in her hand. She looked like a general plotting a siege. "Okay," she said, uncapping the marker. "Let us look at the timeline." She drew a long horizontal line and marked a date. September 12th. "Here," she said. "This is the date the Briarcrest Properties LLC was formed. You were listed as the managing member. Where were you on September 12th? I checked my calendar on my phone, though I already knew. I was in a compliance training seminar in Boston. I have the flight receipts and the hotel folio. Good, Sloan said, slashing a line through the date. Physically impossible for you to be at the bank in Briar Hollow signing the Articles of Incorporation. Next, she moved down the line. November 4th, a line of credit was opened in your name at the community bank. $50,000. Where were you? I was at work. I said, I had a performance review that morning. I was in the office from 8 to 6. Sloan nodded. And the bank closes at 5. She stepped back, looking at the diagram of fraud that spanned 18 months. It was a masterpiece of deception. Whoever had done this hadn't just scribbled my name on a napkin. They had access. They had my social security number, my previous addresses, my mother's maiden name. They knew my routine. It is intimate, Sloane said, echoing my thoughts. This isn't identity theft. Claire, this is identity impersonation. Someone walked into those banks and convinced the loan officers that they were you, or they convinced the loan officers that they had your authority. I looked at the photocopies of the checks. The signatures were good. Not perfect, but good enough to pass a casual glance. They had practiced. Julian. I said, he has always been good at mimicry. He used to forge Dad's signature on report cards in high school. Sloane picked up a document, a signature card for the Hearthlight Giving Fund. It was dated 6 months ago. The frightening part isn't the forgery. Sloane said, it is the notarization. Look at this. She slid the paper toward me. Beside the fake signature was a stamp. Lakeside Mobile Notary. Commission expires 2028. And a signature. Brenda L. Halloway. I don't know a Brenda Halloway. I said, she stamped this document stating that you appeared before her in person, presented valid identification, and signed this of your own free will. Sloane said, if we can break the notary, we break the chain of custody. If we prove you weren't there, the document is void. And if the document is void, the liability doesn't stick. I stared at the stamp. It was a small circle of ink, but it felt like the barrel of a gun. Do it, I said. Find her. Sloane was already dialing. While Sloane hunted the notary, the war on the ground in Briar Hollow was getting dirty. I hadn't logged onto social media in 2 days, following Sloane's strict orders, but the town of Briar Hollow didn't need the internet to destroy a reputation. They had the rumor mill. My phone pinged with a text from an old friend, Sarah, who still lived 3 streets over from my parents. I don't want to get involved. The text read, but you need to see what Julian is posting. People are talking. Attached was a screenshot from Julian's Instagram. It was a picture of him and my parents, looking somber, standing in front of the fireplace. The caption was a masterclass in vague malice. Family is fragile. It is heartbreaking when someone you love loses their way and tries to drag everyone else down with them. We are praying for truth, and we are praying for mental health. We will protect the Kelly legacy, no matter the lies being told. #family first. #pray for Claire. I felt my blood temperature rise 10 degrees. Pray for Claire. He wasn't just defending himself. He was painting me as unstable. He was seeding the ground with the idea that I was the one lying, that I was the one having a breakdown. It was a preemptive strike. If I testified against them, the town would already believe I was crazy. I scrolled down to the comments. So sorry you are going through this. Julian, mental illness is so hard on the family. Stay strong. We know the truth. The Kellys are the heart of this town. They were circling the wagons. My parents were the benefactors, the donors, the pillars. I was the prodigal daughter who had left. It was an easy narrative to sell. I threw my phone onto the couch. Why are you mad? Mommy? I jumped. Sophie was standing there, holding her iPad. She looked concerned. I am not mad, honey, I said, forcing my face to soften. Just work stuff. People keep calling you, she said. Is it about Grandma and Grandpa? I walked over and sat down next to her. I smoothed her hair. Sophie was smart, too smart. I couldn't lie to her completely, but I couldn't tell her the truth. I couldn't tell her that her uncle was currently gaslighting an entire zip code. Grandma and Grandpa and I are having a disagreement. I said carefully, sometimes adults make mistakes, and sometimes, when they make mistakes, they get scared and say things that aren't true. Are they in timeout? She asked. I smiled, a genuine, grim smile. Yes, baby, they are in a very big timeout. My job right now is to keep our life steady, to keep us safe, okay? Okay, she said, accepting the logic. Can I have a snack? Yes, you can have a snack. As she ran off to the kitchen, I felt a heavy stone settle in my stomach. I was protecting her from the noise, but I couldn't protect her from the fallout. My phone rang again. It wasn't Julian. It was a number I recognized with a dread that turned my hands cold. It was the HR department at Harbor and Pine Risk Solutions. I picked up. "Hello? Claire, this is David." My boss said. His voice was stiff, formal. Not the voice of the man who had joked with me at the holiday party 2 weeks ago. "Hi, David, Claire. We need to have a conversation. We received a notification from the State Attorney General's office regarding an active investigation involving financial fraud. Your name was flagged." I closed my eyes. I gripped the phone tight. "David, I am a victim in that investigation. My identity was used without my consent. I am working with the authorities to clear it up. I understand that is your position." David said, "And I hope it is true, but you work in compliance. Claire, you handle sensitive financial data for our clients. We operate on a basis of absolute trust. I know that." I said, "Until this is resolved, we have to place you on administrative leave, effective immediately." The air left the room. "David, please, if you suspend me, it looks like an admission of guilt. I have done nothing wrong. It is just for optics. Claire, we have to protect the firm. Once your name is cleared, you can come back. But for now, we have to revoke your system access." I stared at the wall, my job, my career. The one thing that was entirely mine, the credibility I had built over a decade of late nights and perfect audits. They had taken that, too. "I understand." I whispered, "Take care of yourself." "Claire." The line went dead. I sat there, the silence ringing in my ears. My parents hadn't just stolen my credit. They had stolen my standing. They had reached out from Briar Hollow and touched the one part of my life I thought was safe. I wasn't just fighting for my money anymore. I was fighting for my survival. Later that afternoon, Sloane called back. Her voice was buzzing with adrenaline. "We got the journal," she said. "The notary?" "Yes. I threatened to file a complaint with the Secretary of State if she didn't produce her logbook within the hour. She sent over a scan. And I am looking at the entry for October 14th. Sloane said, "The Hearthlight Giving Fund signature card. There is a signature in the journal next to your printed name. Does it match?" "Not even close." Sloane said, "It looks like a shaky attempt at your signature. But the slant is wrong. It leans left. You lean right." I felt a surge of hope. "That proves I wasn't there." "It gets better," Sloane said. I called her back. I asked her how she verified the identity of the signer if the signature didn't match. She started stammering. She said she verified identity through a credible witness. Who? She wouldn't say. She hung up on me. But here's the kicker. Claire. Lakeside Mobile Notary isn't a brick-and-mortar business. It is a woman working out of her minivan, and I just ran her name through the Briar Hollow social pages. And she is the sister-in-law of the landscape architect your father uses for the estate, the connections, the small-town web. She is lying. I said, she is terrified. Sloane corrected, and terrified people make mistakes. We are going to subpoena her. We are going to put her under oath, and she is going to crack. But before we could celebrate, the other shoe dropped. Investigator Vance called me at 5 o'clock. "Miss Kelly," he said, "we have received a packet of documents from your parents' attorney." I stiffened. "What kind of documents?" "They are submitting minutes from a board meeting dated last January. The minutes state that you were appointed as the chief financial officer of the Hearthlight Giving Fund and that you were given full autonomy over the accounts." I laughed. It was a hysterical, sharp sound. I was appointed CFO? I didn't even know there was a board meeting. "The minutes are signed," Vance said. "By you?" "They are forged," I shouted. "Just like everything else." "Ms. Kelly, listen to me," Vance said, his voice dropping. "They aren't just defending themselves. They are building a case against you. They are claiming that you set up the shell company, that you drained the funds, and that they were merely silent partners who trusted their daughter. They are saying you are the one who embezzled the money." I felt dizzy. The audacity was breathtaking. "They are trying to frame me." I said, "Yes," Vance said. "And right now, it is a he said, she said. We need physical proof. We need something that definitively ties them to the fraud and excludes you. Because right now, on paper, You look like the CFO. I hung up. I felt trapped. They were rewriting history, and they had the paperwork to prove it. I needed air. I needed to move. I packed Sophie into the car. "We are going for a drive," I said. We drove aimlessly for a while. Listening to the radio, I was driving on autopilot, my brain churning through the details. Minutes, board meetings, CFO. I needed to find the crack in the armor. As we drove past the post office, I remembered something. My mail. I hadn't checked my P.O. box in a week. I had set it up years ago when I first moved to the city, a way to keep my address private. I pulled in. I left Sophie in the car with the doors locked and ran inside. The box was full. Junk mail, magazines, and a red envelope. Urgent. Final notice. It was a bill for a storage unit. Secure Keep Storage, Unit 404. I stared at it. I didn't have a storage unit. The bill was addressed to me, Claire Kelly. The billing address was my parents' house, but it had been forwarded to my P.O. box by the Postal Service because my parents must have finally stopped paying the forwarding fee, or the forwarding order had expired and the post office caught it. I looked at the location. It was in a town halfway between the city and Briar Hollow. A neutral ground. Why would I have a storage unit? I looked at the dates. The account had been opened 2 years ago. The payments had been made in cash. Monthly. Until last month. Someone stopped paying. My heart started to hammer. I got back in the car. "Mommy? Where are we going?" Sophie asked. "We are going on an adventure," I said. It took 40 minutes to get to the storage facility. It was a grim concrete row of metal doors behind a chain-link fence. The office was closed, but the gate code on the bill worked. I drove to Unit 404. I didn't have a key. The bill said, "Lock out in 48 hours." I had a bolt cutter in my trunk, a relic from an old apartment move where I had lost the key to my own padlock. I shouldn't do this. This was breaking and entering, but my name was on the bill. Technically, it was my unit. I told Sophie to stay in the car and play her game. I got out. The wind was howling, cutting through my coat. I snapped the padlock. It gave way with a metallic crunch. I rolled up the door. The unit was small, 5 by 5. It wasn't full of furniture. It was full of boxes, banker's boxes. I pulled one down. I opened the lid. My breath hitched. It was paperwork, thousands of pages of it. I pulled out a file. Hearthlight Giving Fund. Donation receipts. 2023. I pulled out another. Briarcrest Properties. Invoices. And then, at the bottom of the box, I found the Holy Grail. It was a notebook, a spiral-bound notebook. I opened it. It was in my mother's handwriting, the distinctive looping script I had seen on birthday cards my whole life. January 4th. Transfer 5 K to C. K. Account for cover. February 12th. Sign C. K. on loan docs. Julian to handle notary. March 3rd. Move assets to Shell. Use CKID. It was a ledger, a handwritten ledger of the fraud. She had written it all down. Why? Because my mother was obsessive. She needed to keep track of the lies. She needed to know which lie belonged to which account. And next to the notebook was a small velvet bag. I opened it. A key. A safe deposit box key, number 112. I stood there in the freezing cold, holding the evidence of my own destruction. They had rented this unit in my name to hide the paper trail. They had moved the physical evidence out of the house, probably months ago when the rumors started. They thought it was safe here. They thought that if the police raided the house, they would find nothing. And they were right. The house was clean. The dirt was here. In a storage unit they had stopped paying for, assuming the contents would just be auctioned off or destroyed. Or maybe they just forgot. Arrogance makes you sloppy. I took a picture of the notebook. I took a picture of the boxes. I took a picture of the unit number. I closed the door. I didn't take the boxes. I couldn't disturb the chain of evidence. I got back in the car. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely buckle my seatbelt. "Mommy?" Sophie asked. "You are crying." I touched my cheek. I am okay, baby," I said. "I am just relieved." I called Sloan. I found it. I said, "I found the smoking gun. The next morning, the dynamic shifted. Sloan took the photos of the storage unit to Investigator Vance. They got a warrant for the unit within the hour. By noon, state police were cataloging every piece of paper in Unit 404, and then the notary broke. Sloan called me at 2 o'clock. She flipped. Sloan said, her voice was pure satisfaction. Tell me, we deposed her this morning. We showed her the journal discrepancy. We reminded her that perjury is a felony. She started crying. She gave us a statement. What did she say? She said your mother called her. She said Eleanor Kelly told her that you were in town but couldn't make it to the signing because you were sick. She said Eleanor provided copies of your driver's license and passport. Eleanor told her it was a family favor and that she would make sure the notary got the landscaping contract for the new library project if she helped out. She bribed her. I said, she bribed her. Sloan confirmed, and Julian was there. The notary said Julian practiced your signature on a piece of scratch paper before signing the document while she watched. I looked out the window. The sky was gray and heavy with snow. So we have them, I said. We have them on forgery. Sloan said, we have them on conspiracy. And with the ledger you found in the storage unit, we have them on intent. They weren't just panicked. Claire, this was premeditated. They have been planning this for 2 years. I hung up the phone. I walked into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked different. The fear was gone. The confusion was gone. For 32 years, I had been the daughter. I had been the one who sought approval. I had been the one who apologized. I had been the one who wanted peace. I looked at my eyes. They were hard. They had tried to bury me. They had tried to take my name, my credit, my career, and my freedom. They had tried to leave my daughter motherless. I wasn't Claire Kelly, the disappointment, anymore. I washed my face. I put on my makeup. I put on a blazer. I was done waiting for an apology that would never come. I was done hoping they would realize they loved me. They were not my parents. They were defendants, and I was the witness who was going to put them away. I walked out to the living room. Sophie was watching TV. Mommy, are we going to see Grandma and Grandpa again? She asked. I looked at her. I thought about the grandmother who had left me that voicemail. The one who had tried to warn me, no. Honey, I said, we aren't. Why? Because, I said, my voice steady and cold. They made a choice. And now, they have to live with it. I picked up my phone. I dialed Sloan. File the civil suit. I said, are you sure? Sloan asked. Once we file, it is public record. The whole town will know. It is war. I know. I said, burn it down. Sloan, burn it all down. I pressed end. Let them spin that. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and old wood, a scent that I had always associated with justice but now recognized as the smell of stagnation. I sat in the third row, my hands folded in my lap, feeling the eyes of Briar Hollow burning into the back of my neck. It was a Tuesday morning. The hearing was technically a procedural motion regarding the freezing of the Hearthlight Giving Fund's assets, a dry legal maneuver initiated by the state attorney general. But in a town this size, there was no such thing as a procedural motion involving the Kelly family. It was theater. It was a spectator sport. The gallery was full. I saw the faces of people I had gone to high school with, the parents of Sophie's classmates, the shopkeepers I had bought coffee from just days ago. They weren't here for the legal arguments. They were here to see the fall. They wanted to know if the rumors were true, if the Golden family was really tarnished, or if I was, as the whispers suggested, the unstable daughter who had finally snapped. My parents sat at the plaintiff's table. They looked immaculate. My father, Richard, wore his navy suit, the one he wore to Sunday service and board meetings. My mother, Eleanor, was in a soft gray wool coat. Looking fragile and dignified, she held a handkerchief in her hand, dabbing at dry eyes whenever she felt the judge's gaze drift her way. They did not look at me, not once. Their attorney, a man named Marcus Sterling who had a reputation for being expensive and vicious, stood up. He smoothed his tie. Your Honor, he began, his voice baritone and smooth, filling the room. We are here today because of a tragic misunderstanding. The Kelly family has served this community for 40 years. The Hearthlight Giving Fund has built libraries. It has funded scholarships. It has been the beating heart of Briar Hollow. He paused, letting the weight of their benevolence settle over the room. To have these assets frozen based on the confused and vindictive accusations of an estranged family member is not just an injustice to my clients. It is an injustice to the people this charity serves. I felt a muscle in my jaw jump. Estranged, vindictive, Sterling continued, pacing slightly. We understand that Claire Kelly has had financial struggles. We understand that single motherhood in the city is difficult. It is not our place to speculate on why she would fabricate these claims about her own parents, or why she would attempt to seize control of the family trust through these allegations. We only ask that the court considers the source. This is a private family tragedy that has been dragged into the public square by a daughter who perhaps feels she is owed more than she has earned. The room rippled with whispers. I heard a low murmur of agreement from the back row. I kept my face like stone. I had been warned by Sloane. Do not react. Do not scoff. Do not cry. If you show emotion, they win. They need you to look crazy. So I looked like a statue. I looked at the judge, a stern woman with reading glasses perched on her nose. She was reviewing the documents, the forged signature cards, the affidavit from the notary, the ledger I had found in the storage unit. Sterling was good. He was painting a picture of two philanthropic elders being elder abused by a greedy, failing daughter. He didn't mention the storage unit. He didn't mention the notary's confession. He focused entirely on character. Sloane stood up. She didn't pace. She didn't use flowery language. She stood behind the defense table, anchored and sharp. Your Honor, Sloane said, her voice cutting through the atmosphere like a razor. Mr. Sterling is telling a compelling story. But we deal in evidence, not narratives. The evidence shows that Claire Kelly's identity was used to secure $150,000 in debt without her knowledge. The evidence shows her signature was forged on dates she was verified to be hundreds of miles away. This is not a family dispute. This is fraud. And the assets must remain frozen to prevent further dissipation of funds that belong to the donors, not the Kelly family. The judge looked up. The motion to freeze assets is granted, she said, banging the gavel. We will reconvene for the preliminary hearing on the 16th. It was a small victory, but it felt like a defeat. As the courtroom cleared, I had to walk down the center aisle. I had to pass them. My mother looked up then, her eyes locked onto mine. There was no love in them. There was no apology. There was only a cold, terrifying calculation. She looked at me not as her child, but as an obstacle that needed to be removed. My father stared straight ahead. His jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscles working. I walked out into the cold January air, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I felt dirty. I felt stripped bare. I had chosen the truth, and the cost was that everyone I had ever known was now looking at me and wondering if I was a monster. I drove straight to the house of my friend, Elena. She was the one person in town who hadn't looked at me with suspicion. She was watching Sophie. When I walked in, Sophie was sitting at the kitchen table, covered in flour, helping Elena roll out cookie dough. Mommy, Sophie cheered. Look, I made a star. It is beautiful, baby, I said, my voice automatically shifting into the soft, warm register I reserved for her. I hugged her, burying my face in her hair. She smelled like vanilla and innocence. Elena looked at me over Sophie's head. Her eyes asked the question, how was it? I gave a small shake of my head. Bad. I took Sophie home. Our apartment in the city was too far for the daily commute required by the investigation, so we were staying in a short-term rental on the outskirts of Briar Hollow. It was small, anonymous, and quiet. I made a rule. No news, no phones in the living room, no talking about Grandma and Grandpa. We watched a movie about a talking bear. We ate cookies. I read her 3 bedtime stories. I created a fortress of normalcy around my daughter. A calm zone where the words indictment and embezzlement did not exist. But once she was asleep, The fortress fell. I sat at the small rental dining table, my laptop open, a glass of cheap wine untouched beside me. Sloan had sent over a file earlier that evening. Subject: Trust Clause Discovery. I opened the document. It was a scan of the original Kelly Hearthstone Trust, the one my grandmother Rose had established 20 years ago. I had never seen the full text. My father had always kept it locked away, telling me it was too complicated for me to worry about. Sloan had highlighted a paragraph on page 42. Section 8. Paragraph C. The solvency trigger. In the event that the primary trustees, Richard and Eleanor Kelly, suffer a reduction in personal net worth exceeding 50% of the initial trust principal, or if they become subject to any lien, judgment, or debt liability exceeding $200,000, their trusteeship shall automatically terminate. Immediate control of all trust assets and the corpus shall transfer to the secondary beneficiary, Claire Elizabeth Kelly, to preserve the legacy. I read it 3 times. The solvency trigger. It all made sense. The puzzle pieces slammed together with a deafening click. They weren't just stealing money to live a lavish lifestyle. They were stealing money to hide the fact that they were broke, if they admitted to the debt. If they admitted they had leveraged the house and the cars, they would trigger this clause. They would lose control of the trust, and the trust was the only thing they had left. That was why they needed me to sign the documents on Christmas Eve. That was why they needed to transfer the liability to me, if the debt was in my name. It didn't count against their net worth. If I was the one responsible for the loans, they remained the trustees. They were using me to bypass my grandmother's safeguard. I closed the laptop and rubbed my temples. My grandmother, Rose. I stood up and walked to the suitcase I'd been living out of. I dug through the side pocket and pulled out an old photograph I had saved from the storage unit. It was a picture from a Christmas party, maybe 20 years ago. I was 12. I was standing in front of the tree, wearing a scratchy red velvet dress. My parents were behind me, smiling their perfect, camera-ready smiles. But standing between us, her hand resting firmly on my shoulder, was Grandma Rose. I looked closer at the image, in almost every picture I had of her. She was positioned like that, slightly in front of me, blocking me from them, as if she were a physical shield. She knew they were spendthrifts. She knew they were obsessed with image. She knew that one day, they would eat their own young to survive. That clause wasn't an accident. It was a lifeboat. She had built a trap door into the legal documents to save me, knowing that one day I would need it. "Thank you, Grandma," I whispered to the empty room. The next morning, the scope of the crime widened. I met Investigator Vance at a diner off the highway. He looked tired. He slid a folder across the Formica table. "It is bigger than the charity," Vance said. "What do you mean?" "Briarcrest Properties," he said. "We subpoenaed the bank records for the recurring charges. We thought it was just a shell company for loans. It is not. It is a billing scam." I frowned. "A billing scam?" "Your parents, or whoever was running the books, set up a recurring debit system. They targeted the donors of the Hearthlight Giving Fund, people who had given credit card numbers for one-time donations. Oh my God. I breathed. They were charging them small amounts. Vance said, $40 here, $60 there, labeled as maintenance fees or sustaining membership. Amounts small enough that wealthy people might miss them on a statement. But they did it to 300 people over 4 years. I felt sick. These were their friends, their neighbors. And here's the kicker, Vance continued. The fake invoices for these fees? They were sent from an email address. Claire, K, finance at briarcrest.com. They created an email address in my name. I said, they did. And they used it to respond to inquiries. When a donor would email asking what the charge was, Claire would reply, apologizing for the computer error and promising a refund that never came. They used you as the shield. Ms. Kelly, you were the customer service rep for their theft. I stared at the coffee in my mug. It was black and bitter. I am going to jail, aren't I? I asked quietly. Not if we can prove it wasn't you, Vance said. But the digital footprint is messy. The IP addresses trace back to the family home, but also to public Wi-Fi spots in town, cafes, the library, places you could have been when you visited. They thought of everything. I said, they thought of a lot. Vance agreed, but they didn't think you would fight back. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. I pulled it out. It was a text from an unknown number, but I knew who it was. We can end this. Just come to the house. We have a proposal. We can clear your name. We tell them it was an accounting error. We pay it back. You just have to sign a statement saying you authorize the temporary transfers to cover the cash flow. We will take the hit for the negligence, but you take the hit for the authorization. No jail time. We all walk away. Do it for Sophie. Do you want her to see her grandparents in handcuffs? It was Julian. The offer was tempting in the way a poisoned apple is tempting. It offered a way out. No trial. No prison for anyone. Just a stain on my professional record and a lifetime of knowing I had let them win. We will clear your name. It was a lie. They wouldn't clear my name. They would use that statement to bury me if I signed an admission that I authorized the transfers. The solvency trigger in the trust wouldn't matter. I would be liable. They would keep the money, and I would be left with the debt. I took a screenshot of the messages. I saved them to the cloud. I sent them to Sloan. I didn't reply. That evening, I made a mistake. There was a holiday event in the town square. Lights of the Hollow. It was a tradition. Hot cocoa, carolers, a bonfire. Sophie had been begging to go. I thought it would be safe. It was public. It was crowded. I thought my parents would be in hiding, licking their wounds after the hearing. I was wrong. We were standing near the bonfire, watching the sparks rise into the night sky. Sophie was holding a candy cane, her cheeks flushed with cold and happiness. "Look, Mommy, the fire is dancing. It is, baby," I said, smiling. Then I felt a shift in the air. The crowd parted slightly. "Hello? Claire." I turned. My mother and father were standing there. They were wearing matching camel coats. They were holding travel mugs. They were smiling. It was a grotesque performance. They looked like the kindly grandparents from a storybook. "Sophie!" my mother cried, opening her arms. "Oh, look at you. Grandma has missed you so much." Sophie looked at me, uncertain. She remembered the tension, the yelling, but she was 8, and this was Grandma. "Hi, Grandma," Sophie said, taking a tentative step forward. I stepped between them. I channeled Grandma Rose. "Do not," I said. My voice was low, barely a whisper, but it was hard as iron. "Claire, darling," my father said, his voice booming slightly, pitched for the audience. "Don't be like this. It is Christmas. We just want to give our granddaughter a hug." People were watching. I saw Mrs. Gable. I saw the postman. They were watching the unstable daughter keep a child away from her loving grandparents. "You are not speaking to her," I said. "You are not touching her." "We brought her a present," my mother said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a small, wrapped box. "Just a little something. We know you are struggling. We wanted to make sure she had a good holiday. It was a trap. If I took it, I accepted their narrative. If I refused it, I looked cruel." I looked at Sophie. She was looking at the box with interest. I made a choice. "We are leaving," I said. I grabbed Sophie's hand. "Come on, Sophie. We have to go. But I want to see the present," Sophie whined. Pulling back, "No," I said. "We are going now." "Claire, stop making a scene," Julian said. I hadn't seen him. He had materialized from the crowd behind them. He was smiling, a tight, predatory smile. "Just take the gift. Claire, don't punish the kid because you are paranoid." I felt the heat rising in my face, the urge to scream, to shout, "They are thieves! They stole her future!" was overwhelming, but I knew that was what they wanted. They wanted the scream. I took a breath. I looked Julian in the eye. "I am not paranoid. Julian, I am prepared." I scooped Sophie up into my arms, even though she was getting too big to carry. She started to cry. I walked away. I walked through the crowd. ignoring the whispers. "Did you see that? She is so cold. Poor Richard." I kept walking until we reached the car. I buckled a sobbing Sophie into her booster seat. "I hate you," she yelled. "Grandma wanted to give me a present." "I know, baby. I know. I am sorry." I got into the driver's seat. My hands were shaking. I locked the doors. My phone buzzed. I pulled it out. Expecting a taunt from Julian, it wasn't a text. It was an alert from the bank app I had installed on Sloane's recommendation to monitor the few accounts I had left. Security alert. Transfer attempt detected. Source: Hearthstone Trust. Custodial account. Amount: $45,000. Initiated by Claire E. Kelly. Location: mobile device. Time: 7:42 p.m. I looked at the clock on the dashboard. It was 7:43 p.m. I looked back at the town square. My parents were there. Julian was there. I had just seen them. They were standing by the fire, performing for the crowd. But someone had just used my credentials to try and drain the last $45,000 from the trust. If they were standing in front of me, who pushed the button? I realized then that the rot went deeper than just the three of them. Or they were so brazen that Julian had set up a scheduled transfer, or had done it from his pocket while smiling at my daughter. The timestamp: 7:42 p.m. I was standing in front of them at 7:42 p.m. There were 50 witnesses. There was probably security footage from the town hall. I couldn't have initiated the transfer. I was holding my child. They had just handed me the alibi. And they had just handed me the proof that the impersonation was ongoing, active, and relentless. I drove the car out of the parking lot. Sophie had stopped crying and was now sniffling quietly, sensing my intensity. "Mommy?" she asked. "I am okay." "Sophie," I said, "I am okay. I wasn't just okay. I was done. I was done playing defense. I was done worrying about the scene. I was done worrying about burning bridges." I drove back to the rental. I carried Sophie inside. I got her settled with a cup of warm milk. Then I went into the bedroom and called Sloane. "Do it," I said. "Do what?" Sloane asked. "Cooperate. Fully. Give Vance everything. Give him the texts from Julian. Give him the storage unit photos. And tell him about the transfer attempt tonight. Claire, once we do this, there is no going back. You will be the state's primary witness. You will have to testify against them in open court. It will destroy them, I know," I said, "and it will destroy any chance of reconciliation. You will be the woman who sent her family to prison. They aren't my family." "Sloane," I said, looking at the timestamp on my phone one last time. "They are identity thieves who used to know me." I hung up. I sat on the edge of the bed. I felt a strange lightness. The guilt was gone. The fear was gone. The bridge was burning. And the fire was the only thing that was going to keep me warm. I opened my laptop. I logged into my social media. The account I hadn't touched in weeks. I wrote a status update. To the people of Briar Hollow. There are two sides to every story, and the truth has receipts. See you in court. I hit post. The anatomy of a lie is rarely pretty, but in the case of the Kelly family, it was gruesome. By the second week of January, the forensic accountants had peeled back the skin of my parents' life, and what lay beneath was not wealth, but a rotting network of debt. I sat in Investigator Vance's office, staring at a whiteboard covered in red ink. It looked less like a financial diagram and more like a map of a hemorrhage. "You see this?" Vance asked, tapping a circle labeled Briarcrest Properties. "This wasn't just a shell for loans, it was a funnel. Explain it to me." I said, I was numb. The shock had worn off days ago, replaced by a cold, clinical need to understand the mechanics of my own destruction. "Your parents have been insolvent for 5 years, Vance said. "The house? It has 3 liens on it. They leveraged the equity to pay for the country club membership and the cars. When the equity ran dry, they started opening lines of credit in your name to pay the interest on the liens." I looked at the numbers. $200,000 in home equity loans, $80,000 in credit card debt. They were robbing Peter to pay Paul. Vance said, "But Peter ran out of money, so they invented a new person to rob." "You?" "And the charity?" I asked. That was the slush fund, Vance said grimly. They used the Hearthlight Giving Fund to cover their personal mortgage payments. They disguised the transfers as administrative overhead and consulting fees paid to the shell company. But the hole got too big. The auditors were coming. I closed my eyes. The dinner, the folder, they needed me to sign. I whispered. Vance nodded. If you had signed that trustee transfer, you would have become the legal owner of the shell company. The debt would have transferred to your credit profile. They could have claimed that the consulting fees were paid to you, and that you were the one who mismanaged the funds. They weren't just trying to share the load. I said, the realization hitting me with the force of a physical blow. They were trying to exit the building before it collapsed and leave me inside. Precisely, Vance said. They needed a fresh host. You were solvent. You had a clean record. You were the perfect life raft. I walked out of the police station and stood on the sidewalk, breathing in the frigid air. It was a gray Tuesday. The world looked flat and colorless. I had spent my life thinking my parents were strict, demanding, and obsessed with status. I had never realized they were desperate. The cruelty at the dinner table, the leave and never return ultimatum. It wasn't about disappointment. It was about panic. They were drowning, and they had decided that if someone had to sink, it should be me. My phone buzzed. It was Sloan. Meet me at the bank, she said. The one in Oak Creek. Bring the key. The key from the storage unit. Safe deposit box number 112. I drove to the bank, a small brick building in a neighboring town, far enough away that the tellers didn't know the Kelly name. Sloan was waiting in the lobby, wearing a trench coat that looked like armor. We signed in. The clerk led us into the vault. It was a quiet, sterile room lined with steel drawers. The air smelled of metal and secrets. The clerk unlocked the box with her master key, and I inserted the small brass key I had found in the velvet bag. The lock clicked. I pulled the long metal drawer out and carried it to the private viewing room. My hands were shaking. I didn't know what to expect. Gold bars? Stolen cash? I opened the lid. It was almost empty. There was a single thick envelope, sealed with wax, and a bound legal document. I picked up the envelope. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. It was spidery, elegant, and firm. For Claire, to be opened when the wolves come. Grandma Rose. I felt a lump form in my throat, hard and painful. She had been dead for 5 years. Yet here she was. I broke the seal. A scent of lavender drifted up, faint but distinct. My dearest Claire, if you are reading this, then my son and his wife have finally run out of runway. I have watched them for years. I have watched the way they hunger for applause more than they hunger for truth. Vanity is a hungry mouth. Claire, it eats everything. It eats money. It eats love. And eventually, it eats children. I have tried to protect the trust. I have tried to keep the principals safe from their grasping hands. But lawyers are clever, and desperation makes people creative. I fear that one day, they will try to use you to break the seal. Do not let them. You were always the strong one. You were the one who could sit in silence without needing to fill it with lies. That is your power. Protect your peace. Protect your daughter. And never, ever let them convince you that their shame is your burden to carry. I have made arrangements. Look at the amendments. I love you. My quiet warrior, Grandma Rose. I wiped a tear from my cheek. I hadn't cried since the night in the apartment, but this was different. This wasn't grief. It was validation. She had seen me. All those years when I thought I was invisible. She had been watching. Sloan picked up the legal document. She flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the text rapidly. Oh, this is good, Sloan whispered. This is very, very good. What is it? It is a codicil. Sloan said, a secret amendment to the Kelly Hearthstone Trust. It was filed with a separate firm in the capital, triggered only by a specific event, the investigation of the primary trustees for fraud. She turned the document toward me. Upon the initiation of any criminal or civil inquiry into the financial conduct of Richard or Eleanor Kelly, the beneficiary status of the trust shall immediately skip the first generation. All assets, future interests, and control shall vest irrevocably in the grandchild. Sophie Elizabeth Kelly, to be held in a protected custodial account managed by an independent fiduciary until she reaches the age of 25. I stared at the words. Sophie. It skips me. I said, It skips you, Sloane said, grinning. And it skips Julian. It locks them out completely. They can't pressure you to sign it over because you don't own it. Sophie owns it, and the independent fiduciary clause means they can't bully you into withdrawing funds for them. Grandma blocked them. I said, from the grave. She didn't just block them. Sloane said, she nuked them. This document means that even if they stay out of prison, they are destitute. They can't touch a dime of the family money. It all belongs to your daughter. I placed the letter back in the box. I held the amendment in my hand. They don't know about this. I said, no. Sloane said, but we are going to tell them. The reaction was immediate. Sloane faxed a copy of the amendment to Marcus Sterling, my parents' attorney, at 4 o'clock. By 5 o'clock, the tone of the war had shifted. My phone rang. It wasn't a blocked number. It was my father. I let it go to voicemail. Then my mother called. Then Julian. Then a text from Sterling to Sloane. My clients request a private conference to discuss a settlement. They believe there has been a terrible misunderstanding and wish to resolve this within the family. Within the family. The magic words. We agreed to meet the next morning at a neutral location, a mediation center in the city, far away from the prying eyes of Briar Hollow. I walked into the conference room with Sloane. My parents were already there. They looked smaller than I remembered. My father's suit looked slightly large on him, as if he had lost weight in the last week. My mother was pale, her hands clasping and unclasping on the table. Julian was there, too. He was pacing by the window, looking like a trapped animal. Claire, my mother said, her voice trembling. Thank you for coming. I didn't sit down immediately. I stood at the end of the table. I am here because Sloane advised it. I said. My father cleared his throat. He tried to summon his old authority, but it cracked. We saw the document. He said, from your grandmother. Yes. I said, she was confused at the end. He said, we all know that. She didn't understand how complex the finances were. She seemed very clear to me. I said, listen, Claire, Julian interrupted, turning from the window. We can fight this amendment. We can tie it up in probate for years. Nobody sees a dime. The lawyers eat it all. Is that what you want? For Sophie to get nothing? I looked at him, always the bully, always leading with a threat. Or? I asked. Or, Julian said, stepping closer, we come to an arrangement. You agree to set aside the amendment. We agree to modify the trust structure. We give you a payout, a lump sum, $100,000, right now, and we clear up the debt thing. We tell the police it was an administrative error. $100,000, I repeated, to sign away my daughter's future? It is a lot of money. Claire, Mom said, it could pay off your loans. You could buy a new car. I looked at them, really looked at them. They were terrified. They knew that if the amendment held, they were finished. They had no house, no income, and now, no trust fund to raid. They were trying to buy me off with scraps of the money they intended to steal from my child. I sat down. I placed my hands on the table. I have one question. I said. They leaned in. Hopeful. They thought I was negotiating. Why? I asked. Why what? Dad asked. Why did you try to make me sign the debt? I asked. My voice was calm, devoid of anger, just curious. On Christmas Eve, you knew the police were coming. You knew the house of cards was falling. Why did you look at me across the table, your daughter, and try to handcuff me to a sinking ship? Why didn't you ask for help? Why did you try to frame me? Silence stretched in the room. Thick, suffocating silence. My mother looked down at her hands. My father looked at the wall. Julian looked at his shoes. They couldn't answer, because the answer was too ugly to speak. Finally, my father spoke. His voice was rough. We had to protect the name. Claire, the Kelly name, it means something in this town. We thought you could handle it. You are young. You can rebuild credit. We are old. We have nothing else. I felt a chill go through me. You thought I could handle it. I repeated, you thought I was disposable. No, Mom cried. Not disposable. Just resilient. You have always been the strong one. Resilient. The word tasted like ash. They punished me for my strength. They weaponized my stability against me. Sloane tapped the table. There will be no settlement, she said. The amendment stands. Sophie is the sole beneficiary. Wait, Julian said. Pulling a folder from his briefcase, he slid it across the table. Just look at this. It is a compromise. We drafted it last night. It keeps Sophie as a beneficiary, but it reinstates Dad as the trustee, just for administrative purposes, to handle the investments. It simplifies the tax burden. Just sign this, and we drop the challenge. I looked at the paper, reinstatement of trustee authority. It was the same trick, different font, different day. If I signed this, Dad would have control of the assets again. He would drain the account before the ink was dry. They hadn't learned a thing. They weren't sorry. They were just maneuvering. I stood up. No. I said, Claire, be reasonable. Dad shouted, slamming his hand on the table. I am being reasonable, I said. I am protecting my client, my daughter. I walked to the door. You walk out that door, and you are dead to us, Julian yelled. I turned back. I looked at the three of them, a tableau of greed and fear. I was dead to you the moment I walked in on Christmas Eve. I said, you just forgot to bury me. I walked out. I didn't look back, but the war wasn't over. It was about to get louder. 2 days later, Investigator Vance called me. We have a situation, he said. What kind of situation? We have a wiretap on Julian's phone. Vance said, he has been making calls. He is trying to move the last of the liquid assets, about $50,000 that was sitting in a dormant charity account. He is trying to funnel it out before the freeze order hits that specific bank. He is trying to steal it? He is trying to launder it, Vance corrected. He has a contact, a vendor for the upcoming winter gala. He is planning to cut a check for catering services to a company that doesn't exist, and the guy is going to kick back the cash to Julian. The winter gala. The biggest event of the season. It was scheduled for Saturday night. We need to catch him in the act, Vance said. We need him to confirm the transaction. We need a witness. You want me to go? I said, I want you to wear a wire. Vance said. I froze. Me? At the gala? He trusts you, Vance said. Or rather, he thinks he can manipulate you. He thinks you are weak, if you approach him. If you tell him you are reconsidering the settlement, he might brag. He might tell you what he is doing to prove how smart he is. I felt a wave of nausea. I had to walk into a room full of people who thought I was crazy, confront the brother who had betrayed me, and lie to his face. I will do it. I said. Why? Vance asked. Because I want it on tape, I said. I want everyone to hear it. Saturday night arrived with a vengeance. A blizzard was howling outside, but inside the Briar Hollow Country Club, the chandeliers were gleaming. I wore a black dress. Simple, severe. I didn't wear jewelry. I wasn't there to sparkle. I was there to record. The device was taped to my chest, hidden beneath the fabric. It felt hot against my skin. I walked into the ballroom. The air was thick with perfume and gossip. Heads turned. The whispers started immediately. She has the nerve to show up? I heard she sued her parents. I heard she is broke. I kept my head high. I scanned the room. My parents were holding court near the bar, laughing too loudly, drinking too quickly. They looked like ghosts haunting their own funeral. Julian was in the corner, talking to a man in a tuxedo I didn't recognize. I made my way over. Julian saw me. His eyes narrowed. He said something to the man, who nodded and walked away. Well, look who it is, Julian said, swirling his drink. The prodigal sister. I need to talk to you. I said, not here, he said, looking around. Too many ears. We walked to the terrace doors. We stepped out onto the balcony. The cold wind hit us instantly, muffling the sound of the party. What do you want? Claire? Are you here to serve me with more papers? I looked at him. I tried to look defeated. I slumped my shoulders. I am tired. Julian, I said, I am tired of the fighting. I am worried about Mom. He softened, the predator sensing weakness. She is a wreck. Claire, you are killing her. I don't want to hurt anyone. I said, I am scared about the debt. If I sign that settlement, how do I know you guys can actually pay off the loans? Where is the money coming from? Julian laughed. He leaned in close. He smelled of scotch and arrogance. Don't worry about the money, he said. I have it handled. How? The accounts are frozen. Not all of them, he whispered. I have a workaround. A vendor payment. It clears on Monday. 50 grand. Clean cash. Enough to keep the wolves away until we can break the trust amendment. He was admitting to money laundering. But isn't that risky? I asked. Like the dinner? He scoffed. The dinner wasn't risky. It was genius. We just ran out of time. If you had just signed that damn paper before the cops showed up, we would be in the clear. We needed your signature before the raid. Claire, that was the whole point. We needed a fall guy. We needed a fall guy. He said it, clear as a bell. You really hate me that much? I asked softly. I don't hate you. Claire, he said, taking a sip of his drink. I just needed you to be useful. That is your problem. You have never been useful. You just take up space. I looked at him. My brother, the boy I had shared a bunk bed with. Thank you. Julian, I said. For what? For clarifying things. I turned and walked back inside. I felt the tape burning against my chest. I had the confession. I had the intent. I had the crime. I walked through the ballroom, past the staring faces. I didn't care about them anymore. They were watching a play, and the final act was about to begin. I went to the lobby where Vance was waiting in an unmarked car. I got in. Did you get it? He asked. I pulled the device from my dress. I got it. Vance listened to the audio. When he heard Julian say, we needed a fall guy, he stopped the recording. That is it, he said. That is the nail in the coffin. I leaned back against the seat. I felt drained, empty. Go home. Claire, Vance said. We move on Monday. I drove back to the rental. The snow was falling harder now, covering the world in white. My phone rang. It was David from Harbor and Pine. Claire? Hi. David? Listen, I heard from the Attorney General's office. They gave us a preliminary heads up. It looks like you are going to be cleared. Yes, I said. We want you back. Claire, we can reinstate you on Tuesday. Full benefits. And we will issue a statement supporting you. I listened to his voice. He was relieved. He wanted his efficient, reliable compliance analyst back. He wanted the problem to go away. Thank you. David, I said, I appreciate that. See you Tuesday? I will let you know. I said. I hung up. I walked into the kitchen. The house was quiet. Sophie was asleep in the back room. I stood in the dark, watching the snow fall outside the window. I had my job back. I had the trust protected. I had the evidence to send my family to prison. I should have felt triumphant, but I just felt done. I walked into Sophie's room. I stood over her bed. She was sleeping with her mouth slightly open. Her hair fanned out on the pillow. She looked so peaceful. I had spent my whole life trying to earn their love. I had spent the last month trying to survive their betrayal. I touched Sophie's cheek. I wasn't going to negotiate anymore. I wasn't going to settle. I wasn't going to be useful. I was going to be the storm. I went back to the kitchen. I poured a glass of water. I looked at the calendar on the wall. Monday. The gala was tonight. Monday was the bank transfer. Monday was the end. I took a sip of water. Let them enjoy the party. I whispered to the empty room. It is the last one they will ever have. The chandeliers of the Briar Hollow Country Club were crystal stalactites, dripping light onto the heads of the town's elite. The room smelled of pine boughs, expensive perfume, and the kind of heavy, suffocating entitlement that only old money can generate. I stood near the entrance, clutching a clutch purse that contained nothing but my phone and a tube of lipstick. I was wearing the same black dress I had worn to record Julian on the terrace. But the air in the room had changed. The recording was done. The trap was set. Now, we were just waiting for the animal to step into the cage. The event was the Winter Solstice Gala, the crown jewel of the Hearthlight Giving Fund's social calendar. It was supposed to be a celebration of charity. Tonight, it was a crime scene. I scanned the room. There were 300 people here: the mayor, the school board president, the bankers who had unknowingly processed fraudulent loans, and in the center of it all, holding court like royalty in exile, were my parents. Richard and Eleanor Kelly were performing the role of their lives. My father was laughing at a donor's joke, his head thrown back, a glass of champagne in his hand. My mother was touching the arm of the library director, her face a mask of benevolent concern. They looked radiant. They looked untouchable. But I knew what they were doing. Investigator Vance had briefed me 10 minutes ago via text. They are moving the money. Now, Julian had stepped away from the party. He was in the cloakroom, huddled over his phone, initiating the transfer he had bragged to me about. He was trying to move the last $50,000 from the charity's dormant account into a new entity called Everline Community Initiatives. It was a fake company, a ghost ship designed to carry the loot away before the ship sank. I took a deep breath. I walked into the ballroom. The whispers started like the rustle of dry leaves. Is that her? I thought she was cut off. She looked severe. I ignored them. I walked straight toward my parents. My mother saw me first. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a glitch in the programming, before reassembling itself into a look of weeping joy. "Claire!" she cried, loud enough for the table next to her to hear. "Oh, Richard, look, she came." My father turned. He didn't look happy. He looked wary, but he knew the audience was watching. "Claire," he said, opening his arms. "We didn't think you would make it." I didn't hug him. I stood just outside his reach. "I'm just here to say goodbye." "Dad," I said. My mother swooped in, grabbing my arm with a grip that was like a steel claw disguised in velvet. "Don't be silly," she hissed under her breath, still smiling for the cameras. "You are making a scene. Come, let us go to the library. We need to talk like family." The library, private, soundproof, the place where they could bully me into submission without witnesses. "No," I said, pulling my arm away. "I think we should stay here." "Claire, please," my father said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "We have a proposal. Julian told us you are ready to be reasonable. We can fix the debt. We can fix the reputation. Just come with us." They thought I was there to surrender. They thought the conversation on the terrace with Julian had been genuine. They thought I was the same scared little girl who just wanted everything to be okay. I looked at my mother. I looked at the diamond necklace she was wearing. It was paid for with a line of credit opened in my name 3 years ago. I recognized it from the invoices Sloan had found. "I like your necklace." "Mom," I said. She touched it reflexively. "Thank you. It was a gift from your father." "No," I said. "It was a gift from me. I just didn't know I bought it until last week." Her face went slack. "What?" she whispered. Suddenly, the music stopped. It wasn't a dramatic record scratch. It was a slow, confused fading of the string quartet as 4 men in dark suits walked onto the stage. They weren't musicians, and they weren't waiters. The room went silent. One of the men stepped up to the microphone. It was Investigator Vance. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption," Vance said. His voice was calm, professional, and terrifyingly authoritative. "I need everyone to remain where they are. This is an active crime scene investigation." A gasp went through the room. A collective intake of breath from 300 people who had never seen consequences up close. My father turned to me. His face was gray. "What did you do?" he whispered. I didn't answer. I just looked toward the side door. Julian was being escorted into the room by 2 uniformed officers. He wasn't in cuffs yet, but he was being held by the arm. He looked sweaty. He looked small. He was holding his phone like it was a grenade that had failed to detonate. "Julian?" my mother shrieked. "Julian, what is happening?" He tried to transfer the funds. "Mom!" Julian shouted, his voice cracking. "The system locked me out. It is a trap." Vance stepped down from the stage and walked toward us. He was followed by a woman. She was small, middle-aged, wearing a heavy winter coat that looked out of place among the evening gowns. She was shaking. It was Brenda Holloway, the notary. My parents saw her, and the blood drained from their faces so completely that they looked like wax figures. "Brenda?" My father choked out. "Ms. Holloway," Vance said, stopping in front of us. "Do you recognize these people?" Brenda looked at the floor. Then she looked at me. Then she looked at my parents. "Yes," she whispered. "Speak up, please," Vance said. "Yes," she cried, tears spilling over. "That is Richard and Eleanor Kelly, and that is their son, Julian. And did you witness Claire Kelly sign the loan documents for Briarcrest Properties on October 14th? Vance asked. The room was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. "No," Brenda sobbed. "She wasn't there." "Then who signed them?" Brenda pointed a shaking finger at Julian. "He did. He practiced her signature on a napkin, and she pointed at my mother. She gave me the driver's license. She told me it was okay. She told me it was just a formality." "Liar!" my mother screamed. The sound was feral. It tore through the polite silence of the gala. "She is lying. She is a confused woman. We never met her, Ms. Kelly," Vance said, turning to my mother. "We have your text messages to Ms. Holloway arranging the meeting. We have the GPS data from your car placing you at her home. And we have the ledger." My mother froze. "The ledger. The notebook from the storage unit. We have the notebook." "Eleanor," Vance said softly. "The one where you wrote it all down." My father staggered back. Bumping into a table, a glass crashed to the floor. Shattering, Julian, seeing the walls closing in, did the only thing he knew how to do. He attacked. He broke free from the officer's grip and pointed at me. "It was her!" he shouted, his eyes wild. "She is the one. She handled the accounts. She is the CFO. Look at the board minutes. She set this whole thing up to frame us because she hates us. She is unstable. Ask anyone." He looked around the room, begging the crowd for validation. "She has been jealous of us for years. She stole the passwords. She is the one who moved the money. I was just trying to stop her." The crowd murmured. They looked at me. I was the outsider. I was the one who had left. It was a desperate, ugly lie. But in a town like Briar Hollow, sometimes the lie is more comfortable than the truth. My father latched onto it. "Yes," he shouted, straightening his tie. "It is a setup. My daughter has a history of mental health issues. She is vindictive." I stood there. I felt the heat of their accusations washing over me. A month ago, this would have crushed me. A month ago, I would have cried. I would have begged them to stop, but I wasn't that person anymore. I reached into my purse. I pulled out my phone. I didn't shout. I didn't make a speech. I simply unlocked the screen and opened the file I had saved. I tapped the screen and held the phone out to Vance. "This is a recording from 45 minutes ago," I said. My voice was clear. It carried, "On the terrace." Vance took the phone. He held it up. In the silence of the room, the audio was tinny but unmistakable. The dinner wasn't risky. It was genius. If you had just signed that damn paper before the cops showed up, we would be in the clear. We needed your signature before the raid. Claire, that was the whole point. We needed a fall guy. Julian's voice, arrogant, dismissive, confessing. We needed a fall guy. The words hung in the air like smoke. I watched the faces of the donors. I watched the mayor. I saw the moment the spell broke. I saw the moment they realized that the charming, generous Kelly family looked at them not as friends, but as marks. Julian stopped shouting. He looked at the phone in Vance's hand. He looked at me. "You bitch," he whispered. "You wore a wire." I didn't answer him. I looked at Vance. "I also have the screenshots of the text messages offering to pay me to take the blame." I said, "And the transfer logs from tonight's attempt to move the funds to Everline Community Initiatives." Vance nodded. "Richard Kelly, Eleanor Kelly, "Julian Kelly," he said. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, identity theft, and money laundering." He gestured to the officers. It wasn't like the movies. There was no tackling. There were no guns drawn. It was quiet. It was the bureaucratic, shuffling sound of wrists being pulled behind backs, the metallic click of handcuffs, the reading of rights in a monotone drone. My mother didn't scream again. She went limp. She looked at her friends, her eyes pleading for someone to intervene, for someone to say this is a mistake, but nobody moved. The circle had closed. The tribe had expelled them. As they were led away, my father stopped. He was passing right in front of me. He stopped and locked eyes with me. I expected remorse. I expected him to finally say he was sorry. I expected him to look at his daughter and realize he had broken her heart. But he didn't. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. His lip curled. "You ungrateful child," he hissed. "After everything we gave you," he didn't see his crime. He only saw my betrayal. He didn't see that he had stolen my identity. He only saw that I had refused to let him get away with it. I looked at him. I looked at the man whose approval I had sought for 32 years. "I gave you the only thing I had left. Dad," I said softly, "I gave you the truth." The officer pulled him forward. "Move along." They were marched out of the ballroom, past the Christmas tree, past the buffet, and out into the snowy night. The room remained silent for a long beat. Then, the murmurs started again. But the tone had changed. It wasn't gossip anymore. It was shock. I felt a hand on my arm. It was Sloane. She had been standing near the back, watching. "Come on," she said. "Let us get out of here." We walked out. I didn't look back at the donors. I didn't care what they thought. I walked out into the cold. Clean air. The flashing lights of the police cruisers were painting the snow red and blue. I watched my family being loaded into the back of separate cars. "It is over," Sloane said. "Yes," I said, "it is over. But revenge is a hydra. You cut off one head, and another grows in the dark." 2 weeks later, the dust had begun to settle. The charges were formal. The bail was set at an amount they couldn't pay. The assets were seized. The house, the beautiful, perfect house on the hill, was foreclosed upon by the bank. I was back at work. Harbor and Pine had welcomed me back with an uncomfortable amount of fanfare. Desperate to show they supported a whistleblower, I took the promotion. I took the raise. I earned it. I was sitting in my kitchen, watching Sophie eat cereal. She was happy. She had stopped asking about Grandma and Grandpa. Kids are resilient when you remove the source of the toxicity. My phone rang. It was Sloane. I picked up. "Hey, did we get the final trust certification?" "I got the packet," Sloane said. Her voice was odd, tight. "And?" "The trust is secure," she said. "The amendment held. Sophie is the sole beneficiary. The independent fiduciary is in place. Your parents can't touch a dime." "Great," I said, leaning back in my chair. "That is great news. There is something else." "Claire." My stomach dropped. The tone. It was the tone of bad news. "What is it?" "A new filing just hit the docket this morning," Sloane said. "It is an emergency petition in family court." "Family court?" I asked. "Why family court?" "It was filed by Julian's attorney, on behalf of your parents, but they are in jail." I said, "They can still file." Sloane said, "Claire, they are challenging your fitness as a mother." I stood up. The room spun. "What?" "They are claiming that you are mentally unstable." Sloane said, reading from the document, "They are claiming that your actions against the family demonstrate a pathological vendetta that endangers the emotional well-being of the child. They are requesting that the court appoint a guardian ad litem to oversee Sophie's custody arrangement." "They want to take her?" I whispered. "No," Sloane said. "They know they can't take her. They are in prison. But they are petitioning for the court to appoint a third-party guardian to manage Sophie's assets and her living situation." I felt the bile rise in my throat. "Why?" I asked. "Why would they do that?" "Because the money belongs to Sophie now," Sloane said. "If they can prove you are unfit to manage her or her life, They can try to get a court-appointed guardian who might be more sympathetic to their legal defense fees, or they just want to hurt you. They are using her. I said, again, they can't get to the money. Sloane said, so they are going after the one thing that matters more to you than the money. They are weaponizing motherhood. I looked at Sophie. She was laughing at a cartoon on the iPad. She had milk on her chin. They were in a cell, facing 20 years, and they were still trying to reach out and strangle me. They weren't fighting for freedom anymore. They were fighting for scorched earth. I gripped the phone. Can we stop it? I asked. We can fight it, Sloane said. But it means psych evaluations. It means character witnesses. It means they will drag every mistake you ever made into the light. It is going to be brutal. Claire. I looked at the snow falling outside the window. I thought about the gala. I thought about the way my father looked at me. Let them come. I said, Claire, I am not the daughter anymore. Sloane, I said, I am the mother, and if they think they can use my child to pay for their crimes, they are going to find out that I kept the receipts. I hung up the phone. I walked over to Sophie. I kissed the top of her head. What is wrong? Mommy? She asked. Nothing, baby. I said, just grown-up stuff. I went to the window. I looked at the city skyline. They thought the story ended when the handcuffs went on. They thought I would be satisfied with justice, but they forgot one thing. I was a Kelly. And if there was one thing a Kelly knew how to do, it was fight until the bitter end. They wanted a war for my daughter. I would give them an apocalypse. Thank you so much for listening to Leave and Never Return. This story was a journey into the dark heart of family betrayal, and I hope it kept you on the edge of your seat. I would love to know where you are listening from. Please drop your city or country in the comments below. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed Claire's battle for truth, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories and share this story with a friend who needs a reminder that the truth always comes out. Let me know your thoughts on the ending. Do you think Claire will win the custody battle? Share your theories in English in the comments. Until next time, keep your receipts.